I don't know if you can hear that. Alright, drinking some kombucha today. We're going to be doing this one live. So I'm going to be going at it without a script. Let's get into it. Hello, Internet. I am Jackie Fox. Welcome to the video. This is going to be another one on propaganda, because if people look way back on my channel, they'll know that one of the first reasons that I started this channel was to have the opportunity to debunk propaganda. And as an American-focused channel, I have focused a lot of my videos on American propaganda. And in a way, this is going to be another one of those videos. However, we are going to be talking a little bit more about Russian propaganda in this video. And this is eventually going to get us to a discussion about people like Glenn Greenwald and Tucker Carlson. Just a quick TDLR on my opinions of the two of them. I think that there's something that is in some ways actually more nefarious than like open treason that is happening with people like this. And, you know, keep in mind, treason is a legal term. And the punishment for it is death. So you're saying that these people should be put to death for what they're saying. And even if they are, like, being paid to do Russian propaganda, I don't think they should be killed for it, necessarily. I don't actually approve of the death penalty in general. So that makes it a real easy call for me. You know, I just don't approve of anyways. I do think, actually, that they are being paid to produce Russian propaganda, what is effectively Russian propaganda, and to defend Russian propaganda. But the thing is, the thing that you wouldn't expect about that is who's paying them. Because it's not necessarily Moscow, and I mean, there could be an element of that to this, but that's a pretty big claim, and so far I've seen no one who's come up with evidence for it relating to these people, like real hard evidence that, you know, they're being paid by Moscow to do this. But I do think that they are in a media ecosystem that at this point in time, there is a financial incentive, there is a kind of a rabid fan base for Russian disinformation that has been cultivated within our media sphere. And that these are kind of a small but dedicated group of people that are willing to believe pretty much anything you tell them at this point. So let's get into how America got to this place. And at this point, I really want to recommend that you watch at least my previous video called Meme Wars, in which I talk a lot about QAnon. And guess what? That's where we're going today, too. So get out your tinfoil hats. We're talking QAnon today. Good God. So just first, I want to kind of tell you how I came to this video and this concept. I made a fucking Rumble account. Not to publish videos, although I might actually put some of my videos up there. There are merits to having multiple platforms, and you know, especially these censorship-free ones. Like, these people are radicalized. If I am going to de-radicalize, it makes sense that I be on these platforms. They're going to hate me, but I might as well get on them. But that's more of a long-term goal. I made this account just to shit-talk Glenn Greenwald, to be honest with you. Because there were some good parts of that video as I kept watching, like, I'm not going to get into it. We'll get into him later. But one of the places that started me down this rabbit hole and started me doing a thing that I have told people and told myself not to do for a very long time, and that's read the comments. Peace and harmony. And also to be participating in that. So this is... I also got on Telegram. Oh my god. Like, intentionally to join, like, QAnon groups and just be a fly on the wall. And you guys don't understand. You're very sheltered. It's so much worse than you're probably imagining. I'm telling you right now. And you can get a taste of this by looking at certain people's comment sections that have kind of developed the cult following of the QAnon crowd. And there are some new people who are starting to get that following who didn't have it previously. And that's where Glenn Greenwald gets into this. But you know, the thing that tipped me off to this, I was watching Andrew Callahan's Channel 5 News coverage of the People's Convoy, which is like the idiot stepbrother of Canada's Freedom Convoy. And just like lightning round, 4 reasons why the People's Convoy was worse than the Freedom Convoy. Number 1, most of the mandates that they're protesting against, are already being taken off the books, or already were before the protests happened, and B, have never been anywhere near as severe in America as they were pretty much across the board in Canada. So American protesters, by comparison, have much less reason to be protesting compared to the Canadian protest. Second reason? Well, they didn't really do anything. Like, this was a completely pointless and almost ignorable protest that pretty much only caused a little bit of traffic congestion in Washington, D.C. That's about all they managed to do. And it's interesting watching the Channel 5 News coverage, because you can kind of watch them as they approach D.C. and they just, you know, I think they did this with some intention of having an Ambassador Bridge type moment, and then they just realized, you know what? I don't want to fuck with the U.S. government. Like, this is scary. And it's weird to watch the bravado of, like, people talking like they have convoy trucks full of guns to, we probably shouldn't stop traffic in D.C. Like, they ended up, for a while, circling around the DC loop. They took up 2 lanes of traffic and drove at like 55 miles per hour. The traffic is already bad on this loop. Like, the traffic is pretty much universally bad throughout Washington, D.C., to be completely honest. This just kind of made it worse. Also, if I'm understanding this correctly, I think it's a 4-lane highway on both sides, so they're only blocking like they're only slowing half the traffic, which is more than enough to make this kind of a traffic nightmare, but also not what happened on the Ambassador Bridge by any means. It's just making things inconvenient for people. It really seems to be more in the vein of the thought of like, let's occupy a downtown center and blow our horns. Except they aren't actually obstructing anything or occupying anything. They're just driving in circles. And this also leads to number 3, which is the fact that a lot of these people are protesting the higher gas prices, and gas prices are higher since the Freedom Convoy. So tell me where in the protest of gas prices are unaffordable you got the idea to drive all the way across the country and then waste your gas driving in a circle, pretty much just annoying people without really getting anything out of it. And like, what could this protest win since most of the mandates are already gone? Like, it's purely symbolic. And this ties into number 4. This is because this is like, it's not there are good copycat protests. Like, Occupy came from the Arab Spring. We did things differently. We incorporated new ideas into it. This is basically the protest as it was portrayed on TV, which pretty much devolved into madness. I mean, you had the people on the right wing were pretty much expanding the bounds of the protest to include all of the things that they had been complaining about for the last number of years, which just made the protest about like everything. And then people on the left were happy to interview anti-vax nut jobs, like the most extreme people they could possibly find, to make them all look like crazy weirdos. And that was the news mix that America got about this protest. So they started from that point. There was a point where the Canadian protest made sense. The American protest just started with madness and spiraled downhill from there. But towards the end of the video, Andrew Callahan runs into another like journalist, kind of the same interesting style of street journalist, and he's telling him and showing him all these Telegram channels that he's in that are QAnon related, and he's just showing how, you know, first of all, the conversations are just batshit. That's why I knew I had to like see this for myself, and it's I can't even, man. I can't even describe it, but you do see this very strange phenomenon, and it's very similar to the 2016 phenomenon that people who were like overly active in political groups on Facebook noticed, both on the Bernie side and on the Trump side, where you would be getting people who would just kind of pop in, not really interact with anyone or do anything other than just drop in and drop like inflammatory propaganda that, you know, was just out of bounds. Like, I don't like Hillary Clinton. I have a lot of complaints about Hillary Clinton. There are a lot of reasons to dislike Hillary Clinton. But some of the outright falsehoods that I saw these types of accounts sharing, specifically in Bernie groups, and, you know, making a lot of us look like conspiratorial nutbags in the process, was just very QAnon level, you know? Now, I want to be clear that I'm not saying, like, there doesn't seem to be evidence that QAnon is like a KGB op or anything. Although, the two things are starting to intermesh as time goes on, and that is very apparent through a lot of these, like, alternate media channels. And I'm also not making the argument that they need to be shut down. I'm just saying that, you know, these type of messages are trying to avoid scrutiny. So they're trying to go to platforms that will not scrutinize the values and merits of their message. And they're also going where the people are, and the people that they specifically want are on these platforms. And I think that this creates, like, because I used to think that Glenn Greenwald's content was good. Like, watching this recent Rumble video of his, really, it hurt. It hurt the person that I thought he was. And I think that a large part of the reason is, since being kicked out of his own news organization, after being deplatformed from YouTube, now he's on all of these crazy alt sites, and he has to cater his message to them, because those are the people who are effectively making it able for him to do his day job in this way. They, the viewers, the audience of these apps, are his customer base, and he has to cater his content to that. Now, how does that get to Russian propaganda? Well, you know, as we see on Telegram, as you can see if you read the comments of Glenn Greenwald's videos, a lot of Kim Iversen's videos, a lot of, I mean, even The Hill, like, the Kim Iversen fans who show up to comment on The Hill's videos, on the Rising videos, I mean, just read the comments. That's all. This is the only time I'm going to encourage you to read their comments. They have a specific flavor to them. I don't want to be too forward, but it seems like they are courting a very specific conspiracy-laden audience that incidentally has no patience for Ryan. Mainly because, you know, and the reason why I think it's interesting that Kim is on Rising is that, you know, they basically do 10-minute segments where the first 5 minutes is a monologue and then there's discussion. So, you know, Kim is often onto things. Like, a lot of the time she's good, but I see a lot of her takes and she's shoehorning things. She's using selective outrage, and it's just, they aren't good takes. They're just low quality takes often. And there'll be a couple elements of them that are interesting, that she did some deep research that actually turns out to be true, but I think it's very good that she's in a format where, you know, someone who has the chops to be able to rebut her on a wide variety of issues that she kind of says with no evidence. I think that's good, because she kind of has that just asking questions model that's been infuriating people who are worried about misinformation for so long, because it makes her very willing to spout misinformation, because she's just asking questions. I mean, I gotta see if it's true, but she never really does the due diligence to actually come to a proper conclusion on those things. She just asks questions. And, you know, she's had her YouTube channel deplatformed a number of times. This has forced her onto these other platforms with this radically different audience. They're becoming a big part of her, kind of her consumer base. And therefore she is, even when there's not much to it, pursuing these same types of issues. And I think that, Glenn is very much doing the same thing. It's kind of this, the medium is the message type of thing. Or, when you're on platforms at a very specific user base and you were trying to monetize those people, you have to talk about what they're talking about. And as we see in these kind of private channels where Russian misinformation is being dropped in by these sometimes anonymous sources, we can see how that audience now, especially at this point in time, is very much primed to want to hear someone validate the beliefs that they have cultivated through these channels about Russian disinformation. That's where you get people like Tucker Carlson has very obviously been playing to this very Trumpian QAnon base. He's been playing to this very Trumpian QAnon base for quite some time now, and it's in part, I remember when Fox News, I was on Fox News' Facebook page, when they released the live video of Biden accepting the presidency. And the fact that they showed it enraged so many people that you could watch their likes dropping by hundreds a minute in real time on that day. And by far, Tucker Carlson is pretty much the only host on that network that has consistently been able to draw that audience back in, that has pretty much abdicated the rest of the channel's programming for OAN type propaganda, if not worse. So I don't think that there's necessarily Russians paying these people to spread their misinformation. But I think that they very much have a profit motive to do so, considering the audiences that they were very intentionally set up to court, or considering that they've been kicked off the platforms that have sane audiences that they could, speak with reasonably, and now they have to cater to these increasingly niche audiences that are just out of their minds and want to hear validation of their out-of-their-mind beliefs. I mean, you don't have to go far into, say, Glenn Greenwald's Rumble comment section to get people saying that Trump is literally the reincarnation of Jesus, people who say that Zelensky is a fake president, that was faked in exactly the same way that Donald Trump's loss was faked, so they have this stop the steal flavor that's been applied to something that I don't even really think previously existed very strongly in Russian propaganda. This is new, this idea that Zelensky is a fake president. This is a new kind of strain that has been injected into American politics through these back channel ways since the invasion happened. And this is one of the really interesting parts about Russian propaganda, is that it often kind of copies American propaganda. I pointed this out in my series on Russia and Ukraine, and I pointed out how they're trying to say, well, we're only bombing military targets. Well, then someone points out, well, you bombed a school. And then they say, well, the military is hiding in these places and they're using these civilians as human shields, which is a line that we trotted out through the Iraq war so many times it's ridiculous. But also what they like to do is they like to take existing American conspiracy theories and just add a Russian edge to it. So there are people on these channels already, they need no outside priming to make them believe that that actually the natural origin and the lab leak theory are both false, and actually it's a secret bioweapon that was invented by Bill Gates to force you to get a vaccine with a microchip. And YouTube Censors, please note, and it's a shame that I have to do this, but please note that I am debunking these claims, that I'm not saying these claims are true. I am just illustrating where these people's heads are at when they are first introduced to Russian propaganda. Because they're taking a lot of these things, like these people who believe that COVID-19 was an intentional bioweapon by the elites to depopulate the world or something, in a part of some Davos Illuminati agenda. It's very easy to convince someone like that the second wave of bioweapons is actually being manufactured in Ukraine. And in the same way that we saw the original QAnon rhetoric being used to try to prove that Donald Trump was saving the world from pedophiles is also now trying to push this idea that Vladimir Putin is saving the world from the next pandemic, which there is no basis for. And this is the thing that annoyed me the most about Glenn's video. And like, again, if you watch the full video, there are times when he makes cogent points, but the thing that really annoyed me was out of the first 5, I think, sources that he cited and showed, he showed the headlines for all of these. The Russian one, the one that was literally Russian state media, that he said was Russian state media, is the only one he seems to have read, because he clearly misunderstood literally every fact check article and didn't read them whatsoever, at least from where his take is at. I mean, it's really sad when you're trying to make a point with a source and you literally didn't read it. I'm just saying, Glenn, you used to call yourself a journalist. This is pathetic. Please step up your game. Man, I am getting salty. Because I see all these people that I used to respect that are now realizing that it is financially beneficial to them to court this deranged audience, instead of trying to de-radicalize them, instead of trying to like, you know. And things like the lab leak theory, like a lot of the lab leak and anti-Fauci nature of conspiracy theories has been weaponized as a part of the whole Ukrainian bioweapons conspiracy theory. That is kind of the flavor that they injected into their Russian propaganda to make it take hold in America. And like I had said about QAnon originally, as a big tent conspiracy theory, it's functionally the viral equivalent, like the computer viral equivalent of installing intentionally a Trojan horse in your brain. Because all these other malware ideas, all these other conspiracy theories with little to no basis in reality, and a complete misrepresentation of any basis that they would happen to have in reality, these things are so much easier to accept if you already believe kind of a QAnon level conspiracy, because naturally QAnon conspiracy is basically like the Katamari ball of all of the other conspiracy theories they could find to make it, you know, the most virulent strain of viral misinformation possible at the time. And that pandemic is still going on, at least deep in America. And I think that as more and more of these people become indoctrinated with Russian propaganda through these methods, the more that you're going to see the people whom they are an audience to, the more you're going to see comment sections go wild. But more importantly, the more you're going to see the creators realize what their audience thinks, and the more you're going to see them start to cater to this audience. I think this is... The right wing reflexively tried to do this because I think they already knew this is where part of the base, like the most, like a lot of the more reasonable conservatives or right wingers are not like super addicted to online media. The QAnon people are like super overly online, which also makes them excellent media consumers because they will sit in front of YouTube for hours a day. So naturally you want them to spend like one of those hours watching Tucker Carlson or something. If you're in the mainstream media, you're trying to get a slice of that pie of hours a day that they are doing their own research on these topics. Because there's a huge profit motive, there's a huge profit incentive to do that. And, you know, this speaks to the underlying problem in the media in general, but I also think that this means that initial flare-up that we saw on the right, that's where this is going to go, and it's going to get so much worse than that. They course-corrected for a minute, but it's really more like a strategic retreat while they try to figure out how to do this narrative in a way that isn't absolutely going to enrage most normie Americans that are not QAnoners. And I think that that's going to be a real balancing act just because of how far, like, how much QAnon has mutated. Like, we're in a very virulent Russian manufactured strain of that right now. And you know, and this is kind of a thing that a lot of these QAnoners were very entertained and like very engaged with this idea through Trump while he was in office, and then through Trump by Stop the Steal. But eventually that movement petered out. Like, don't get me wrong, these people still believe that the election was stolen, but they aren't necessarily thinking that anything is going to happen. Like, they think it has been stolen. There's no time left to stop the steal anymore. It's over. They have lost this battle, and they hate that. So without Trump to carry the movement anymore, you see them shifting over to like these conspiracy theories about JFK Jr. appearing and running with Trump. Like, you know, like the 24-hour news cycle, a constantly evolving conspiracy theory that has a reputation for always having new nuggets to bring people in and take them deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper into the conspiracy. It's very much the same model as the 24-hour news cycle. So, you know, and the 24-hour news cycle abhors a vacuum. So now that, you know, Trump is not very important to the mainstream media, that most of his supporters, you know, we're far away from the point where he would even start campaigning for re-election officially. So there's not much to talk about there. So now they got to focus on Putin. The interesting dynamic being that, like, maybe if Trump started campaigning, the QAnoners would focus more on him and get away from this weird Russian angle. I'm not sure that that's better by any means. I'm just saying that, you know, as their focus has been taken off of Trump, the people who are most interested and most benefited from perpetuating this particular strain of viral ideology just keep injecting more and more new things into it. And it's evolving to a place where it's getting more and more accepting of any Russian narrative. Like, I have heard so many things, from the things that have a tangential amount of evidence to ones that are just, you made this up. You don't have sources. They don't exist. For example, so going into these comment sections, one of the things that I did was I would seek out people who seemed to be shepherding the conversation, that had kind of good response rates, essentially, and had an air of, there's this weird alpha thing that, like, people who pretend to be know-it-alls, like, there's this know-it-all attitude in certain commenters. I was kind of looking for that smugness, like that real smug asshole vibe, because those people you can kind of insult and push into a corner to a point where they're like rabidly throwing anything they can at you to defend their idea. It's a good way to get a bunch of sources from the other side. So I did this with someone in one of Kim Iversen's videos, actually, while I was doing research on the agreement between Germany and America on the Nord Stream 2. Her video had some great information on that. At the same time, it also contained a point where she was talking about Euromaidan. She called it a US-backed coup, and then she claimed that in opposition to that coup, there were patriotic Ukrainians who rose up and defied this decision by rising up in the streets to support their former president. If you've already seen more than one of my videos on Ukraine already, you know already why this is complete bullshit. But I got into the argument with it about this with a guy just to try to see if I could dig sources out of him, try to see why people believe this. What's the evidence that they would put forward? And after reading so many articles and so many sources, the guy actually only gave me one source. I used it to branch out. I found other things on that topic by the same author. Conveniently, a third of his sources within his own articles just linked to other things that he had. Another third of them linked to really strange YouTube channels that were either had more subscribers but were just like conspiracy factories, you know? Not necessarily focused on one thing, but just tons of conspiracy theories that are just way off. And then there was a bunch of channels that had videos that had like 1 million, 2 million views that he was linking to, but only had like 1,000 subscribers, which is weird how these videos seem to be going consistently viral, even when, you know, the account probably has no reason to go viral. And I just kept digging and kept digging and kept digging on why these people thought that there was a US-backed coup. I found days of research. I read so many articles. I chased so many leads. I watched so many weird videos. Poorly, just not quality content at all. And I found 2 pieces of evidence for this. Okay? And I'm going to present them. I think it's important to know what the counter-argument to your argument is. So this is the substance of their counter-argument. First, there is a tape with Victoria Nuland. Oh yes, that Victoria Nuland, the one who is also coming up in the Ukraine biolabs, bioweapons, biological research centers conversation. She was the U.S. diplomat to Ukraine at the time, and the KGB, because this was on a secure line, we know it was some sort of a state agency. We also know that, that was pretty much the only state that would have the kind of intelligence operation, because the U.S. didn't expect that this line could be hacked. They thought it was completely secure. So they were very surprised when this tape came out. So, logically, means mode of opportunity, it would have been the Russians, right? So KGB. I think that's a logical conclusion. And they linked, a snippet of this. So I think another logical conclusion that follows is that they had that longer phone call, and this was the only part of it that was beneficial for their propaganda, but that additionally they potentially had other phone calls, and they didn't release them. And I looked very hard for other Nuland transcripts, and some of these people are trying to quote. It's ridiculous. But really, the transcript is all they have in terms of hard proof, and it actually does indicate that she was talking with Ukrainian officials before the president was ousted and replaced, before Parliament decided to have an early re-election, because their president had literally fled the country for Russia at that point. They had to get a new president. She had talked to a Ukrainian official about the person that the U.S. would most like to see chosen as prime minister. This is kind of the way that she talked about it. Look, there's a lot of this in kind of our soft power diplomacy that we do. Yeah. Should we talk about the influence that we try to peddle in other people's governments? Yeah, we should. But we should also, weigh just how bad this transcript is versus the amazing weight, the tremendous lift that the conspiracy theorists are trying to make it raise up, because this supports a really, really heavy claim. But the interesting thing here is that the person that she is pushing as the U.S. preferred person did end up becoming the prime minister. So let's talk about how the elections work in Ukraine and kind of how the end of the Maidan went. Because, first of all, just to refute Kim's original statement, because I wasn't, originally when I was talking about that, I was ignorant of what the evidence was for a U.S. intervention. I'd heard it referenced a number of times, but no one had ever brought a source, so I just assumed, well, maybe there isn't one. So really, the claim that I went into this comment section was to refute was this idea that the Maidan was a coup and didn't represent the will of the people, even though tens of thousands of people showed up for months at a time, occupied the nation's capital for a very long time. And there's so much video of this that you can find. There's an excellent documentary, Winter on Fire, that's just 2 hours of raw, some of the bloodiest footage I've ever seen in my life, even in fictional gore. Good Lord. So not for the faint of heart, obviously. But these people fought so hard for 4 months against police that were literally killing them. Over 100 people, I think about 125, 150 people are confirmed dead from this, and at least a few hundred more disappeared. Most of those people got disappeared by the Berkut. So anyways, they fight to maintain this square for 4 months. At the climax of this, the president flees the country for Russia, and Parliament decides we've got to do something. So they approved 3 of the 9 demands of the protesters. First was the disbandment of the Berkut, which was the special forces that had been killing them. Great idea. I approve. they committed like fucking war crimes. Like, get rid of them. The second thing was that they removed a lot of the new presidential executive powers that Yanukovych had been putting into place in order to give him a lot of power over parliament. They have a unicameral system. They only have one house in their parliament, whereas we have a bicameral legislature, which means we have two houses, the House of Representatives and the Senate. Otherwise, they're pretty much the same because they also have a Supreme Court and they also have a president. But in their in their executive branch, they also have a prime minister, which is another thing that we're about to get into. So one of the demands, and this had been kind of the core demand from the very beginning of the Maidan, was basically to, at first they didn't necessarily want to remove the president. Not until he commanded mercenary groups and the police to kill them did they actually want him to be removed, like, across the board. But one of the earliest concerns was with his hoarding of presidential powers and the escalation of that, and how it was throwing their balance of powers out of whack. So Parliament did that as well. And the third thing that they did was they declared that there was going to be an early election for president in the following month to replace the president and the prime minister. So the way that things work there is they have kind of a multi-party system and they have runoff elections. So typically the votes are really divided during the first round of voting, and you have to go into a runoff vote. However, Petro Poroshenko, who had been very heavily aligned with the messaging of the Euromaidan protest, won with I believe 61% of the vote in the first round, which is pretty unheard of. Like, the Ukrainian people tend to be a lot more divided on who they'll choose for any political office, mainly because there's this idea that they're all corrupt. But compared to politicians before, the Ukrainian people seem to have this remarkable faith in Poroshenko and his ability to steer them away from the crises that they saw under Yanukovych. So the president that replaced Yanukovych, who people say was elected democratically. They always say this in their propaganda, that he was elected democratically and then got couped out of office. The funny thing about that is 10 years before he was removed by this revolution, there was a previous one called the Orange Revolution in 2004, the first time he was elected president, that happened after the Supreme Court determined that he had rigged the election. Yeah. I don't know why they allowed him to run again, but after some grooming from Paul Manafort, he was able to actually win re-election twice, and during this time he was building up those presidential powers we were talking about. So in their system, the president nominates the prime minister, and he nominated the person that the U.S. state was most interested in. Although there doesn't necessarily have to be any U.S. influence there, because the guy was pretty well aligned with Poroshenko's beliefs as well. You know, it's not off base that this guy would choose him. It's kind of like if this were America and we had a similar system, and it was Bernie Sanders won president and then chose Nina Turner as his prime minister, that would surprise no one. It would not require a conspiracy theory to explain. So the way this works is the president nominates a prime minister, and then that prime minister has to be approved by Parliament. Parliament has 450 votes total, and they need a simple majority of 226 to approve a prime minister. The highest that this vote has ever gone in favor of a candidate was 373 for Yulia Tymoshenko, who was actually the prime minister after this. She's still in kind of the European-centric bloc of highly popular Ukrainian politicians. Ukrainian politicians. But this prime minister, the very same one, to be fair, that Victoria Nuland had pushed for in this leaked phone call, was nominated by the president, and he received 371 votes in Parliament. So what did they think that Victoria Nuland was doing? It seems like in order to influence the acceptance of the prime minister, what she would have to do is change a lot of people's votes from no to yes. So in order to credit her, even with not even with a coup, Not even with replacing the president, because as we discussed, that was done democratically. Just the amount of weight that she has to lift to have an impact in this presidential election. I mean, in this prime ministerial appointment, she would have to change 145 parliamentary votes. And if she did that, if she spoke, and you know, assuming a 100% success rate in changing their minds, she would have to speak individually to 145 different parliamentarians. And you're telling me that Russia only has this one clip? You want me to believe that, while simultaneously believing that Russia, which wants to prove this narrative true, because it would support them in an effort to get a more Russian-aligned president and prime minister in the future if this were proven to be true. If they could prove that, they would, and they haven't. And I think that makes a big point. But I did say there were two pieces of information. There is one that I hadn't discussed yet. So there was a short video. This was one of the ones that I found on a channel with like 1,000 subscribers and millions of views on the video. And it was in a foreign language. So I got out my phone. I set it up for Ukrainian to English. I pressed record, turned on the video, and my phone was very confused for a moment because this man is actually speaking Russian, despite the fact that he is speaking to the, apparently, to the Ukrainian parliament. And I'm not even sure that this 100% sure that this video is real. I don't know how I would go about verifying that kind of thing. I'm just too far removed from the culture necessarily. But the fact that he's speaking in Russian and making a claim that even in all of the articles about this that I read, I never saw backed up any further or more concretely than this one video. This guy in front of Parliament says without any evidence, without citing anything, that the US is somehow trying to influence future events in Ukraine. That's it. That's it. Just remember all the crazy takes that our Congress people have on a regular basis. And you're telling me that this person who is probably very right-wing, very pro-Yanukovych, so pro-Yanukovych that he speaks Russian, which is a lot more common in the part of Ukraine that Yanukovych is from. He's actually from the Donbass. He's from Donetsk, which is where these protests, by the way, that Kim was talking about, happened in favor of the president. They were very small. They were located almost entirely in Donetsk, which is so weird because it's such a minority, and it's so weird that you would give that precedence over what is so much more obviously the majority opinion of Ukraine. It's just 100% Russian propaganda, and I'm not sure if it's intentional or these people are useful idiots. But I do think that this is a potential profit model that we will be seeing more of going forward. We will probably see defectors from, I think Jimmy Dore is going to jump on this anytime now. I haven't checked to see if he is, but he is exactly a type of person I would expect to do this. I actually don't think that Tulsi Gabbard's take on this was terrible, but she is riding that line. And, I think she's moving in that direction and seeing that sort of audience as her future in politics. So unfortunately, I think she's shifting that way. And of course, Tucker Carlson, as usual, is siding with the QAnon group. So, we're going to see a lot more Russian propaganda coming out of OAN, coming out of alt-right information sources because they've basically found a backdoor into the minds of America, and they found a way to backdoor themselves into the American conversation by starting this almost astroturfed movement within America. And it's almost exactly the same playbook. It's just been modernized a little bit as what they did in 2016, which, again, there's no direct connection that Trump was like a Russian puppet. There's a lot of interesting circumstantial evidence, but I don't think anyone ever proved that point, or it probably would have been brought up in impeachment at any point, and it wasn't. So I think that tells you everything you need to know about some of the harder Russiagate scandal ideas. But there has been a strange connection between the GOP, especially the QAnon era GOP, and Russia that has only deepened after this war started. So I just wanted to kind of call that out before it becomes a problem that we're all facing and becomes a reality. I just wanted to get in there first so I could say, America, I told you so. This is what's coming, and this is why it's happening exactly the way it is. And while I really hoped that we could at least be bipartisan about the issue of Ukraine, for even the length of the invasion, even if it was a short invasion, it doesn't look like we're going to be able to do that. So, it is what it is.